Good evening. Welcome to Popcorn Theology. I am your host. Over the next hour, I will have the pleasure of speaking to you. But I beg of you just one thing. Do not consume, taste, savor, relish, discern, taste the flavor of the Imago Dei, the accents of Christ. Consider every scene that you place inside your mind. Be mindful, but do not consume mindlessly. Your minds are too precious for that. Here we all are. Accept all of it and forgive. And now, the show. I want recording in 5.
Yes, host.
In a world where entertainment is viewed as mindless diversion, only good for momentary distraction, one podcast has taken a stand, thoughtfully engaging the art of our day, dissecting the narrative, and pointing the people back to the greatest storyteller of all. You are about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
Welcome, movie lovers and theology nerds, to episode 288 of Popcorn Theology. I'm Miles.
I'm Eric.
And I'm Maddie.
And we're covering The Menu, 2023's, I think, sleeper hit. And boy, am I excited that we're covering this one. And this is our Patreon Saint winner for this week. And it's funny, as I was putting together the notes, I was searching, who nominated this? And it turns out that it was you, Eric.
So, I may have been the first to nominate it, but I know Maddie was shortly behind me. In it, it was one of those films that just, in my opinion, kind of came out of nowhere. I had one friend from church that was like, "Oh, this is a good movie. Have you seen it yet?" And I was like, "No, I haven't seen it. I honestly didn't have an intention to see it initially." And he's like, no, it's a good movie. You should watch it. So I watched it, and so for me, it's one of those few films that I believe it tries to speak into our culture, particularly in the state that we're in, of where we're just creating content for content's sake. That's basically the culture we're living in, is everything has to be content. Everyone has to be a content creator. But I like it because it also does it. It doesn't do it from the angle that it actually hates its audience. Because a lot of deconstruction stuff is usually, we actually secretly hate our audience, but please buy our ticket to the movie. I liked that it actually made you be smart. It didn't insult you for watching it. It knows that it's content itself, but it seeks to tell the story of why content has become, in a way, so bland and risk-averse, while most content that we watch nowadays is actually highly produced, it still leaves the audience, spoiler alert, hungry at the end. And this film explores that concept.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what a good introduction. And food is a perfect way, the perfect medium for being able to discuss that, because you've got to eat, but it can become this experience that we discuss. And so I think, that's a great description for why this movie won in our Patreon poll. But it was in competition with some seriously good movies. And I saw Maddie in the last week or so really arguing for some of these other ones. In particular, it beat out 4 really good movies. What do you think about that, Maddie? Are you bitter? Are you happy about The Menu?
No, not at all. Because again, I put that one forward as well. So I honestly, this month's Patreon picks, I honestly would have been happy with any of them. They were all really good. But obviously, I think my top ones that I really wanted were Big Fish and Slumdog Millionaire. We've got to cover those at some point.
Mm-hmm.
They are so good, but like I think it was like the perfect time for The Menu because it recently kind of came out. Like you said, it was kind of a sleeper. I was kind of the same way as Eric, where I didn't really hear about it at all. And I think I was actually on Instagram and I happened to see an Instagram ad for it, and I just thought, wow, that looks so interesting. Like, I have to see this. And once I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, why has no one told me about this before?
Yeah, this movie. I wasn't even planning on seeing it, but my wife was like, "Here, let me plan a date," and she planned a date that I would love, which was let's go out to a movie, and then let's go get some food afterwards. I won't tell you what we ate because that kind of spoils the movie, but we ate the exact most appropriate thing at the end of this movie and enjoyed it and did a little couples popcorn theology. It was great. And this
awesome.
movie also, I looked it up, the box office. It was made on a budget of about $30 million and made, I think, double or triple that. It was like, it's actually kind of a small movie.
Oh, yeah.
But all of its ingredients are great performances in particular, I think. So you have Margot,
Absolutely.
who is played by Anya Taylor-Joy. I was surprised it doesn't have an Enye on there. I wasn't sure if that was a like Hispanic. She doesn't look Hispanic, but Anya Taylor-Joy, who was in another movie that just sticks in my head is Glass. I thought that was great. I think it was 2 years ago, and she was in Split and in other places. And then you had Voldemort in here as Chef Slowick, Ray Fiennes.
Forever Voldemort.
Yeah. With his entire nose intact in this one. And then Elsa, I thought...
kind of need that to be a chef.
Yeah. His assistant Elsa was great, too. Hong Chow. I have no idea. Yeah. I hope I'm not butchering her name, but she did a great job as I don't even know what that role is called. Do you? Is it just host?
Is it the it might be, or like the oh man, there is a special term for it. It's not concierge, is it? No.
Are you thinking of Matter D?
Matter D. I think that's what it is. Yeah, it's something like that. Something French.
And she gets one of the best lines in the film too, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Oh yeah, it's so good. Whatever her title was, Tyler would know it. Played by Nicholas Hoult.
Yeah.
Yes.
He does a great job of this movie.
He's always really good.
Yeah.
As somebody who seems at the beginning of this movie just kind of innocently enthusiastic about food, turns out to be something that just like his twist. Oh man, it's so good, and I can't wait to tell you guys about it. But before we get into spoilery territory, in general, do you guys have anything else that you might want spoiler-free thoughts to share before we drop some ads and get into this movie a little bit deeper?
I don't think so.
One thought for me is going into it is this is in the category of satire. So that should be something you should kind of be thinking of as you're going into it. So there's going to be certain, all of the characters in it are heightened characters. So you're meant to not like them. It's something that after we watched the movie, my wife and I, when we watched the movie, she was like, I hate Tyler. I want him to just shut up. Why won't he just shut up? I was like, babe, like, you're supposed to hate him.
Yeah.
It's like, you're not supposed to like this guy. It's like, he's not supposed to shut up until he's run his course, type of thing. So if you know this is a satire or in the category of satire going in, it helps you figure out that just like the chef, he's telling a story, and every little piece is meant to tell a certain part of the story, and you need to look at the whole thing to get the entire story with it. So those are my general thoughts.
Yeah, and it's not quite. In one sense, it's a horror movie, but I think it's like a dark mirror.
It's a dark comedy, I think.
Yeah, probably a dark comedy would be. I wasn't exactly sure what category to put it in, but at the
Because it is funny. Like, there are literally parts where I laughed out loud, even though it's disturbing. But like you said, it's also satire. So it all works for some reason, which is one of the reasons why it is an excellent movie, because it manages to blend all of those together seamlessly.
Yeah, it's just so good, and it's great that this movie caused it was kind of like an organic viral viral sensation within our own little popcorn theology community. And so as we often say, if you would like to continue conversations about movies, we would encourage you to like, share, subscribe to the podcast, follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Discord, YouTube. We are in a lot of channels, all of these ways just to continue conversation with you. In the same way that we like to have a podcast, I like to have a conversation on the podcast, we like to have these conversations with you, especially if you find a movie like the Menu that most people weren't paying attention to, and you think, oh, we've got to talk about this. You've got a real shot of getting it on the podcast and drawing us into your little world.
Another way that you can help support the podcast is to rate and review us on iTunes or wherever you listen. I usually listen on Spotify. Or you can support us financially through Patreon.
Yep. By donating at least $1 a month, you will become patron saint, or as David likes to call everyone, cornheads. So this gives you special access to an exclusive Facebook group and also a certain channel, special channel in the Discord server. Discord is open to all, but there's a special server just for patron saints, and it allows you to vote on the future episodes.
Yeah, you can shape our podcast like our group did for this week. And so with that, we'll hit the ads, and then we'll get into things a little bit deeper on the Menu.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Popcorn Theology. If you want to hear more from us, subscribe on iTunes or your favorite podcast catcher.
Also, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and share this episode with your friends.
Assuming you have friends. To sponsor more content like this, consider supporting Popcorn Theology through Patreon. Then you'll make some friends.
For just $1 a month, you can have friends. You can become a patron saint and be added to our exclusive Facebook group, where you can interact, influence, and vote on future episodes of the podcast.
Well, let's get back to the episode.
Well, we are back, and it's time to get a little bit deeper, not afraid of spoilers, just going to fully digest and share of this movie. And I think a good way to introduce this movie is actually just with a few Tyler quotes. I think, Eric, this already came out of you, is that Tyler is this sycophantic fan of the chef, and as he's describing the first few courses of the movie, first few courses of the Menu, he says, he's telling a story. And then he says, the game is guessing what the overarching theme is. You won't know until the end. And one thing that's really fun about this movie is if you watch it a second time, there will be these lines like that one, or in particular, a line about we don't burn anything unless it's to make it delicious.
Mm-hmm.
All of these things will come back up. And the movie speaks a lot to just incredible preparation and control. Even the music will communicate that. He has one more line where Tyler is just gushing over the chef, and he says, the chef plays with the raw materials of life itself and death itself. It's art on the edge of the abyss. That's where God works too. And so it's very
Such
clearly
a cool
seen
line.
that if that doesn't hit your popcorn theology warning lights, I don't know what will. And this movie is not just about a chef, it's about a storyteller, and a storyteller who's trying to bring something out of his clients and to say something about them. It's just perfect for popcorn theologians. And I think to even just spoil basically the plot, the title of the movie is The Menu. And what is on the menu is the chef's assessment of these people. In particular, the fact that there are givers and takers in the world. And so the chef invites these takers in particular to experience a judgment day. Or thanks to the Bible Project, I've been thinking a lot about the concept of the little d days of the Lord, where there are these times in which God moves to set things right in, well, we would say little circumstances because we're thinking global, but the kingdom of Assyria is going to come in and wipe everything out. That's a little d day of the Lord, looking forward to the big d day of the Lord. And so chef meticulously plans a menu that is a little judgment day. And it says, nothing in the kitchen is arbitrary. It's all controlled. And oh man, it's
all part of the
so
menu.
Yep.
I think, Maddie, you had some interesting thoughts about. Here you go ahead.
Yeah, I guess it is kind of like Judgment Day, but also I kind of actually thought for chef as an allegory for the devil. So in my interpretation of this, Slowick is actually the devil, not God bringing judgment, because he is also guilty, which he freely admits. He's like, I am just as guilty as any of these people. So I was thinking more of along the lines, it reminded me of Job, actually, and how God gives the devil permission to torment Job, right? And so that's what he's doing to these people. Like, he obviously has permission to torment all of these people except Margot. So Margot's the only one that he ends up not touching.
Oh, that's interesting.
So, but again, it's all about sin and its consequences, which is so, again, a cool concept to explore with food. And he even points out, like, the guests don't really try to get away. And that's kind of the power of sin. It makes you morbidly curious as to where it will lead. It's sinfully delicious. And all of these people delight in their sin in one way or the other. And part of the movie is he kind of brings out those sins and points them out to them all.
Yeah, as you guys were pointing out, the characters in this movie, you're meant not to like them. And in so many ways, they're easy not to like. There was one line that struck out to me as chef is introducing the night. I think it's his, I don't even know what course it is now, the name of it, where he's talking about bread, the not bread that he brings out. And he says,
the breadless bread menu.
The breadless bread, right? He says, even Jesus taught us to pray begging for our daily bread. And he says, it's the food of the common man. But you, my dear guests, are not the common man. So, for example, we have like the Wall Street bros, guys who have exceeding wealth that doesn't even seem like they totally earned. And it turns out that they're embezzling, right? All of their relationships are falling apart. And it's so funny in its own way. The chef is revealing their hearts through tortillas. And then I think
I love that line when they were just so mad. Yeah, they're so mad. It's like, what are these? What are these? And Elsa comes over. She goes, those are tortillas. They're like, no, what are these? Those are tortillas.
Yeah. Delicious tortillas. And that's when she gets one of the best lines of the movie, right, Eric?
Yeah. It's after she tells the guys what's up and tells them they're not going to get any bread. She leans into one of them and goes, you will eat less than you desire and more than you deserve. Mm-hmm. And it's just that, like, when you get that, it's like you can take that in the nihilistic way, or you can take it in the grace kind of way of that's really how we're all living in this life. We're all going to eat way less than we desire to eat, but we're also receiving way more than we deserve. And so it's like you can take that line from either like the Christian perspective, where is grace, and go, thank God that I'm actually going to eat less than I desire. Because if I was going to eat what I desired, the world would burn. But God restrains me and he doesn't actually even give me. He gives me more than I deserve, but on the other end, gives me less than I deserve because he put it all on Christ. So I just, when I heard that saying, I was like, it's like a, it's like a gut punch to a lot of people. In my opinion, a lot of different ways and a lot of different perspectives. Obviously, a gut punch to them where they're like, what's going on here?"
Yeah, there's so much in this movie about each of these characters have different flaws, but almost all of them, it's all surrounded around lust, greed, gluttony in their own ways. Their desires are kind of out of control, which for us, considering that the way that God communicates, the primal rebellion of people is seeing food that we ought not eat, that will bring our destruction and shame, and seeing that it's good for food, pleasing to the eyes, and able to make one wise to be able to try to usurp God in our own lives as something to seize and take and consume. This movie just has a transcendent way of assessing these characters. There's the movie star and the assistant, right? The star. At first, when I looked up the cast, I think it was IMDb didn't have his name. I think it was George Diaz or something like that. But I thought
really?
maybe that they'd never shared his real name. It was just movie star, because that's kind of what he is. He's like I'm a name dropping faker. And all he's doing for this.
Clean that.
Way to church up that line there.
Yeah. He's willing to. There is some language and a little bit of violence in this movie, as much as we
Just
totally
a little.
recommend this movie. I guess it's that there was less than I expected.
Yes. Yeah.
My wife still watched a few scenes through her fingers. But this star is like so many of them. He's coming to the meal not to appreciate it for what it is. He's just kind of practicing for his next show, which he's also phoning in. He's got no passion. He's selfish. And then he's got this assistant along with him. And she seems, you'd think, oh, well, she's real sweet, just like the type of person who's really trying to help this movie star and is really, kind of behind every great man, there's a woman kind of thing. But it turns out that she's stealing from him, and she hates him, but she's just kind of riding on his coattails while also serving him. So she gets brought along for this. The couple that I
do love, when she starts to plead with at the end, where he's like, well, and I think we have this in our notes later. Is like he tells the actor why the actor's dying, which was another humorous part to me. I was like, of all the reasons why to have someone there to die was that. But she was like, what? But what about me? He's like, where'd you go to college? Brown. Student loans? She goes, no. He goes, you die. And it's like the way that she was like, yeah, I get it.
Okay.
I get it. It's like, it's if we're talking about givers and takers, someone who went to an Ivy League school with no student debts means you're generally, if you're going to use Marxist categories, definitely in the taker category.
That's another theme this movie kind of focused on was elitism and all of that. Very much so.
Although I had somebody, I came home from this movie, and I think it was my brother-in-law was saying, how was it? I was like, oh man, it's great. It's got some great popcorn theology themes. And he's like, eat the rich, and it's like, it's much more subtle than that. That was one of the only lines in the movie that was clearly just like these people don't deserve their privilege. That would be the Gen Z version. The Marxist version would be the bourgeoisie, but the Gen Z version, well, she's privileged. You die. But the people who are really
but you're right, it
privileged,
did go a little deeper than that.
Yeah, which I found much more interesting. At one point, I thought it was just going to be, oh well, the rich are oppressing us without actually sharing why. But the way they dove into each of these, it's 11 guests, I believe, which I wasn't actually sure what I was supposed to take with that number. I was like, are you trying to go with 12 because his mother is also in the room? And does that have some kind of biblical connection? It wasn't quite obvious to me. or the
No,
11.
I didn't even think about that one.
Yeah.
Well, I was to say, if you count the mother as 12 and then Margot as Judas, so the one that betrayed. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like a flip where you have
I
11.
don't know. That's a
11
stretch.
you have 11 destined for destruction and one that leaves. Because we just came out of Easter, and I was teaching on the resurrection, on the empty tomb, and it was like, and the women went and told the 11. Oh yeah, because Judas isn't there. This kind of flips it on his head, but I'm not sure what it means. I like the number, but I don't know what it means. I'm not smart enough. Maybe somebody in our group will figure it out.
We're discussing.
But the people who, that's why this is a genuine conversation. We got our notes and everything just to keep us on track, but we're just discussing. But the people who were super privileged in this movie were the rich couple, I think Richard and Linda. And in particular, they had been, I think this was their 10th or 11th time to that island. Whereas even everybody, these are some elite people. It's their only time that they've been. And these folks have been over and over and over again. And they are people who are wealthy, but don't appreciate their wealth. Don't stop and smell the roses. And there's this great scene where it's like, I will let your wife go if you can remember a single dish from the last time you were here or the time before that. And his wife whispers to him, cod. And he's like, no, it was halibut. It was rare halibut.
He said, no, you donkey. It's halibut. Which I think they did that because of what's his name? Hell's Kitchen, like Gordon Ramsay.
Oh yeah.
Hasn't he said that before? Doesn't he call people donkey? So that's what I thought of when I heard that. I was like, oh, they totally stole that.
It's great. It's great.
Yeah, they were an interesting couple. So when I saw your notes, I started thinking about it because I watched it again today, and it was hard to pinpoint. It was like, obviously his is adultery. It was like, it's adultery.
Yeah, that's his big issue.
He knew Margot beforehand. Yeah, it's like that's the big issue. But why his wife? Why his wife? And it's like, as I watched it again today, the only thing I could kind of look at is, in a way, she's almost an enabler, and she herself is oblivious as well with it. Because one, she gets it wrong too. She's the one that whispers to him, "Hey, it's cod," and he goes, "No, it's halibut." Yeah. And she says, "What does it matter?" And he goes, "It matters to the halibut, and it matters to the artist." And I think that's where it's like she, in that same position, she didn't have the same sin that her husband did, but she was still in that oblivious type of state of just mindlessly consuming what only the super rich are able to actually consume, and they've consumed it beyond anyone else. Even the Wall Street bros, if we want to call them that, they were actually, if you heard when they were getting on the boat, which I had subtitles so I could actually read it today, they were charging the company. So that was on the company's dime that they were going and doing that. They're like, oh yeah, and they're even bragging that they're going to charge it as a client account, and there's no clients there.
Yeah.
And so, so it's one of those where it's like, but then she herself there, she still was oblivious. She couldn't even name, they had just eaten the signature dish that they serve every single time, and neither of them could remember what it was. They had just eaten it. It had just been served to them, and they were still that oblivious to it.
Because that was the question I had at the end of the movie the first time was, what did that lady do? Everybody else, I could remember all of their arcs, except for her. And there is something about this movie that this kind of tilts our hand a little bit later. Is that, okay, why is the chef and all the sous chefs and everybody, why are they destroying themselves? Because they have, at the very least, passively participated without trying to improve the system that they're in, the world that they're in. And this woman just went along with Richard this whole time and was an accomplice to him. And so it's almost like you won't escape judgment by saying, oh, I didn't do all the sins of commission, but her sins of omission, maybe she's being judged for. And so that their lack of description of her made me, I thought about her the most, actually, in terms of each of the people, besides maybe Tyler, which we will get to, because it was like, what did she really do? But the person I think that we all as popcorn theologians can relate to, it boils down to, I think, Lillian Bloom and Tyler, right? So Lillian Bloom and his assistant were the restaurant reviewers, and she's a taker in the way that she takes by coming in prepared to critique everything in order to elevate her own status. And if that is not a dark mirror of our culture these days, and in particular the film review corners of the internet, and I even think sometimes I look at my own stuff. I love movies, I love popcorn theology, but there's just this real temptation to be excited about my own cleverness, my own insights, as opposed to just tasting the food. And so she's willing to close restaurants. She feeds her ego. I think at one point in the movie, like, people are dying, and she's like, I really think this is all just for us. And it's like, of course you do.
Yes.
It's theatrical.
Yes.
Yeah, it's part of the show. It's part of the show. Yeah. But her, and then so you go through it again. There's so many little lines of the her assistant, and it's funny. It's that he's nothing but an appeaser and an enabler. She'll say something, and then he'll kind of disagree, and then she'll backtrack. Readily agree. Then she'll backtrack, and he goes, "Well, yes, yeah." Just all constantly nodding in his head. One funny line right at the end, as the bill is being sent around, she reaches to go and pay for it. Which that was another humorous thing to me, is he still made them all pay.
Yes.
Yeah, that was really good.
It still made them all pay.
Appropriate.
I was like, wow. And then she reaches to go pay for it, and he reaches out and he pulls it back. He's like, no, and he puts his card down and he goes, it's on the magazine. So, so he's still charged to the magazine, which in a way, the magazine is what put her there. But she was the epitome to me. I'm not sure if you've read the Screw Tape Letters from C.S. Lewis. One of his chapters, he talks about gluttony, and talks about two types of gluttony. There's a type of gluttony that everyone's all familiar with, which is the overindulgence of quantity. But he talks about this other type of gluttony where everything has to be perfect. Whereas, like, oh yes, I'd like a piece of toast, but with just the right amount of butter. I'd like an egg, but it has to be cooked just right. And I think that's where she is when she's at this fancy restaurant. And granted, if you're spending $12.50 a plate, yeah, you shouldn't have a broken emulsion. But the way that she critiques it, the way she almost doesn't even want to eat it because it's a broken emulsion. She's like, ugh, can't believe we're doing this. Oh, they're starting to slip. They're no longer on the edge anymore. It's playing it safe. And so it made me think of that Screw Tape Letters where he's talking about the other side of gluttony, where you're not overweight, but you're not eating anything. It's like the chef, the critic from Ratatouille. It's like, if I don't eat it, I don't swallow. No, if I don't love it, I don't swallow. Type of thing. It's a different type of gluttony.
I love that so much. The hyper skinny food critic is such good visual storytelling in Ratatouille. It's just so good. It's just burned into your memory. Yeah, and these people are so easy not to like. And then you have at the beginning of the movie, right? There's like the first or second person you see is Margot, kind of a girl next door type, and her character gets revealed throughout the movie to be something a little different. But in all of these characters up until this point, it felt like, not in the literal sense, but it felt like God saying, what would I type on your tortilla? All of us, if we were invited to a dinner of somebody who really, really knew us, you could have some things printed on your tortilla. And I think that the mindful consumer of this movie, Christian or non, would probably be able to see plenty of things that clearly printed on your tortilla. Somebody has seen and paid enough attention to burn it onto tortilla delicioso. But then it's almost worse than the rest. Then there's Tyler. What did we think of Tyler?
Oh man, Tyler's like the worst. He's the guy, because I am a barista part-time, and you know he's the kind of guy who will sit there on the counter and like watch what you're doing and be like, well, at home I have this espresso machine and it's like the best one, and it's almost as good as this one. You know, just super annoying. And you're just like, yeah, sure, whatever. You don't actually know what you're talking about. You don't even use the right kind of grind on your espresso machine, but it's okay.
Yeah, and he's so like I don't have a great term for this, but there's people who are into being really into things and not actually being into the thing.
Yeah.
They are into being the type of person who is into something rather than actually enjoying the thing. And it's not always,
They
you
have
can't
no
always just look and see.
application. They have knowledge, but no application.
Yeah. Yeah, man, and he seems like kind of like an innocent, just like he's really into all the chef stuff when he's given this great speech and description at the beginning of the meal. Margot is like, I think I really am starting to get it, and you start to kind of feel for him. Like, sure, you're totally into being a foodie, but that's not necessarily bad. I actually really love talking to somebody who's passionate about almost anything. Like it does not really matter. Like I'm often reminded of one of my favorite scenes in a movie that we were forced to cover was the Devil Wears Prada, where Anne Hathaway's character is totally reamed.
I love that movie.
I love that movie.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah, you guys are the reason.
That was
why
my nomination, by the way.
Yeah, it was great. And she gets totally reamed about how you thought that you picked this little blue belt out of JCPenney, but you don't really know that it's cerulean and that I chose that for you, or the people in this room chose it for you months before. But if somebody who's is deeply passionate and knowledgeable and is in that world, it doesn't actually matter too much what you're talking about. I will be interested in it. But guys like Tyler, the people who are wanting to nitpick the barista who's making her 40th coffee that hour and is taking pictures of the dinner, which you think, oh, it's kind of bad, until you realize the big reveal of this movie is that he invited Margot to die. There's not even going to be a reason. He won't even be able to share these pictures, and he does not care at all about anybody else. He doesn't ask the name of the chef. He can look at all their skills. He knows all the names. The movie star is a name dropper of relationships. Tyler's a name dropper of all these techniques and these foods. It's so bad, and it's no wonder why Tyler just is driven into our minds by the end of the movie.
Yeah, Tyler was convicting for me, particularly when he's talking about, it's like, oh, I've watched every episode of Chef's Table and this and that. And my wife and I, we were for a little bit of time, we were on a kick of those types of shows. And some of the things that Tyler has said, I have said. So I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, it was very convicting for me. It's like, but it is one of those things where it the way that I described it is in when he has to make his own thing finally. The Tyler's BS, as it's called, as he reminds me of, in a way, kind of like the theology bros out there on the internet, that every little conversation in the most small type of way, and it will sound weird when I say this, but everything gets Jesus juked. Like, they don't let a single thing pass by. They don't enjoy the moment. It's this constant, like, jumping to the next thing. But then when you actually start to talk with them and, like, press them on things, they actually don't know their theology usually at all. And it's like, wait a second, you're constantly doing the Jesus jukes and trying to bring everyone back to the mindset of Jesus and Christ, which is good and worthy goal, but you're failing the task yourself. Yeah. As it's that hypocrisy there, where I love how the chef, I forget what the machine was. He's like, oh, I have one of those machines at home.
Taco Jet.
The Paco Jet. Are you sure you don't want to ram that in the Paco jet?
Do you remember where
Yeah,
the Paco jet comes back toward the end of the movie?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah,
what Margot
uses it
uses.
to smash Elsa.
Oh, really? I did not pick off on that. Yeah.
They show a brief shot of it on the floor with a close-up of the logo, and I was like, "Oh, that's funny."
That's
They
very
finally
fun.
used the Paco jet for something.
But oh yeah, Tyler, I think we hate him so much, but man, in our little popcorn theology community or like internet Christian world, it's very easy to become Tyler. So like Alistair K in the Discord server wrote, it was like 3 or 4 paragraphs that were very insightful, some great stuff. But the one that really touched me is he just said, as a film lover, I'm afraid I'll become Tyler. You know, become the film bros, being obsessed but not appreciating or loving what we're doing, movies or Jesus, right? Being gatekeepers and worshipers of movies, and especially of our own sense of expertise. I'm kind of translating. He did. It was very eloquent. I would suggest to you hop on Discord and see all that Alistair wrote there, and it's just it reminds me kind of like just in the last year or so, I started pastoring a small church of about 20 people, and it just reminds me of all the times I came to church and critiqued everything that went on. But now that I'm trying to care and equip the saints for the ministry with limited time, and it just makes me realize that, oh man, I actually thought that I wasn't one of these Theo bros, but now my perspective being on the other side of things is, oh, this is harder than it looks. And being a critic, an ounce of obedience is worth a pound of critique, I think. And it's like for people who are, oh, you know what, I'm an internet watchdog. How many people have you brought to faith lately? How many times have you loved a neighbor? These kind of things, like the basics. And can you actually cook?
I listened to a sermon today from a pastor out here in Northern Virginia, Charles Biggs, and he was doing a sermon on Revelation. I forget which chapter, but it's about the serpent, the dragon, and when the ground opens up and saves the woman. And he's talking about how, now granted, he applied it to Christ, but he was saying if you want to stomp, on the serpent's head, because that's like a lot of guys want to go out there and be warriors for Christ. Is you want to stomp, and he's like, if you want to stomp on the serpent's head, preach the gospel to someone today, because Christ already has. Christ has already stomped on his head, and as what you were just saying, that pound of obedience is worth, or whatever, an ounce of obedience is worth a pound of thought, or
yeah. That basic idea, and it's the thought part is easy. That's the part I like. I like to learn stuff, and so versus, but you can kind of be deceived, and you can miss the things Jesus is saying. Like you should, like, oh, it's good that you're following the Mosaic Law, but you're missing these heavier things. And Tyler, he invites Margot because, well, there's no sitting for two. He's willing to kill her in order to satisfy himself. But she's a really interesting character because you think at first, good girlfriend, especially all these little things she does in the first few scenes, kind of pads his ego, not in a sinful way, but just like a good girlfriend, right? Supporting him at the beginning and coming along for the ride, willing to not smoke the cigarette. You think, oh, well, she's a good girlfriend, but it turns out that she is an escort, or another way that the movie likes to euphemize it a little bit, a service worker. And she's not supposed to be here, right? She's just not supposed to be here.
Yeah, she was an interesting character because in a lot of ways, she's the audience insert for us. So I think we give her more leniency in a lot of different ways. But if we're looking at this more from just the overall, is like, what is her? Yes, she wasn't supposed to be there. But in a way, like what's her sin like that she's contributing to this too? And And so like she doesn't buy any of the pretentiousness of the experience that's going on. She's just like, no, just she's basically someone that I would know that would say, oh, I'm a meat and potatoes girl, type of thing. It's like she's just not buying any of the pretentiousness, and we're supposed to be relating to her. But one of the things I started kind of noticing is at the same time, she's not appreciating the excellence that actually is on display. She's all concerned about the consumption. She wants the quantity. She doesn't want to savor the amount. And as even when she says later on, when the chef asks her, why aren't you eating? She goes, well, you told me not to eat. And he goes, you know I didn't mean that, and you know that. Type thing. She just didn't like the pretentiousness of it. She was looking, as much as they would look down upon her, she was looking down upon them from the pretentious side. She's like, oh, these people are just overly pretentious. And she assumes that pretentiousness is actually a mask for substance. And in all honesty, for most of the guests there, it absolutely is. But for Slowick, and she does confront him later on, and I think she is right about that, about the love versus obsession. But what is going on in that kitchen is excellence, and she's not paying any attention to it either. She's all concerned about that moment, and is my belly being full?
It seems
that was my more of like trying to diagnose her sin type of take, because I know there's different takes to take with that.
Yeah, and I think she is a good audience insert because of that, because she does have a flaw, because you can't have, somebody's human without any flaws. So like, in a sense, she does deserve to be there in one sense, but she was manipulated into going, and I think she's the only one that learns from the experience.
Yeah, because he's repeatedly asking her, why won't you eat? Who are you? I've served many Margos. You are not a Margot. And so she has her issues too. Like part of me was like, I rolled a bit when the chef says, do you enjoy serving people or your services? And she said, I did at first. It's like, you're telling me she's an escort and she really enjoys the service. It's like, I don't particularly like or support. This is one of those reject things. The implication there that somebody could be fulfilled escort, because even though you can simultaneously really feel for people who finally turn to prostitution, nobody chooses that right out of the gate, right? But you are part of the problem in a similar way that the chef sees himself as part of the problem, the overall problem. It's like an escort, the rich man is committing adultery with you, and you're just giving him what you want and trying to find a way to game the system because you're just this woman, I think, who turns out to be from Brooklyn, not the girl next door from Nebraska, but somebody from the city who's, a service worker. But you're not purely a victim. You are part of the problem. But by the end of the movie, she reveals who she really is. She kind of sees her own problem a bit. It's not so obvious, and she finds her way out of this system. And so in the end, it was interesting. So the chef is saying, well, there's givers and takers, right? There's customers and there's chefs and servants. And I was trying to figure out, so is she a giver? Is she a taker? Or is she neither? I think there's kind of an argument for each of these things, especially at different times of the movie, about who she is. Who are you, Margot?
Yeah, so I had taken this side of, it's my own bias because of her profession. I had taken the side of she is a taker, at the end of the day. The things that profession takes from families and individuals and stuff, you can't not be a taker. But so Slowick was right about her. He initially believed that because the powerful were using her, that she was one of the kitchen staff. She was one of the kitchen workers. But after her betrayal, he recognized that at the end, she was in it only for herself. As you kind of started to notice around this stage, everyone kind of, like, this was after the chase scene, everyone kind of just stopped fighting. And I think there's a good application for her later on. but she was still in it for herself. She was still trying to escape from his mindset, at least. She was still trying to escape. She wasn't accepting her fate. And this one line that really struck me, and then how Tyler turned it back on her a little later, this is when he called her a child. Is she said to Tyler, is that you're the customer, you're paying him to serve you. It doesn't really matter if he likes you or not. And later on, after Tyler has upset her, he turns it around to her and he calls her a child, and she's like, "You can't talk to me that way." He's like, light bulb. I forget exactly what it said, but light bulb. He turns it around and basically he's like, "I'm paying you. You need to be quiet." Yeah, at this. And she is quiet. And that's kind of one of those things that is kind of interesting. But I think overall, and I think why you can take her as a giver taker or this other is we're confused about the formula because she actually survives at the end. So we're slightly confused about where to place her. And I think that's partly because she is the audience insert. We're meant to excuse her sins and assume she is the hero. But really, and we assume she's the hero because at the end, she only wanted plain food. I think that's too oftentimes people would watch something like this, and that's what they would come away with it, is that, oh, the high falutin types of food, the deconstructed this, is what you shouldn't be going after. You should be going after the cheeseburgers in life. It's like, no, that wasn't the issue, because you can be just as obsessed and not loving of your craft with cheeseburgers,
or you can be excited to be the type of person who's not pretentious. People can be pretentious about not being pretentious. I'm not like other girls.
Yeah,
I'm not like other boys. Deal, and you're like, well,
well, some are.
Yeah, but yeah, so she only wanted the plain food of life, not because it was better, which it may have been, but because she didn't want to think deeper about the food. It's like, no, Tyler started bringing her along a little bit, but sometimes you could tell she was just, this is just not making sense. Just give me the food. You don't have to tell me a story. You don't have to do this. She didn't want to think deeper about the overall experience. So the film overall is critiquing the mindless consumption as much as the pretentious one. And so she is correct about that love versus obsession with Slovik. He wasn't actually putting love into it. As she said, even your hot dishes are cold. And it struck him. And he knew it. He knew she had him at that point too. But it was that, not the simple burger, is what actually saved her in the end. It was getting Slovik to I think you guys have the notes in here a little later about that love. Getting Slovik to do something with love again is what actually ended up saving her, not that she didn't eat the pretentious food and got the regular old burger. So that was my take. I would say a redeemed taker, if you want to put it that way. So she's not a giver, she's not a taker, she's a redeemed taker.
Yeah, and I remember watching that the second time, because I watched it again last night, and thinking, during that burger scene, thinking back to what set that up for her was when she went into his house and she was looking at all those pictures. And in every picture, he's just kind of this dire figure, no smiles, nothing. Again, he lost enjoyment of his art a long time ago. And then you find this one picture, and he's a fry cook at a burger place, and he's probably, like 17 or something, and he's got a little apron that says "Kiss the Cook," and he's smiling. And I love how they bring that back, because I think if they didn't have that scene, then people really would have thought, like, oh yeah, it was the simple burger that saved her. Like, you should just enjoy, the plain things of life and not think highly of anything. But once you have that set it up for that, it's like, no, that's not what this is about. This is what it's really about.
Yeah, I really like what you guys are saying. This is a great discussion. In particular, the one I think Eric was saying, rejecting both pretension and mindless consumption, is rejecting both of those things, because either of those groups can really look down on each other. And all of this is like,
we do it all the time.
Do it all the time. And Chef is saying, no, I've been trapped I've been trapped in the middle of this. I don't even know how that happened to myself. And just following the chef, it reminds me of what the haunting words we bring up a lot on the podcast, but like Mark 8:36, for what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? So he pursues excellence, which gets us to the shocking turn in this movie where it starts to get real serious for everybody is when sous chef Jeremy comes up and presents the mess, right? And he says, "This is Jeremy. You know, he's good, not great. You know, he wants to be me." But then he asks him, like, "Jeremy, do you?" I think it's something like, "Enjoy your life." And he's like, "No." "Do you want my life?" Something along those lines. I'm butchering it a bit, but "Do you want my life?" "No."
Mm-hmm.
And he's just a broken man. And they talk about the mess of your life. So it's like, he's good, he's very good, he's not great. But even if he was great, he would have messed up his whole life. There's one shot of Slowick with a wife and kid, I think. It's just one picture.
Yeah.
Wherever they are, their life is not good because of his trying to gain the whole world but losing his soul, at least on an earthly level of his relationships. And then sous chef Jeremy did all those things and he still didn't achieve excellence. So it's even, what does it profit a man if he spends his whole life trying to gain the whole world, doesn't gain the whole world, and loses his soul? And where does that lead you? Despair, loss of hope, suicide. And so the guy blows his brains out in the middle of the restaurant. All the staff are completely unsurprised. But it's just like, that's when you start realizing, oh, this is something much more serious than eat the rich, aren't these pretentious people terrible? And the line, I think it's from Slowick, trying to satisfy people who will never be satisfied. My fear of irrelevance drove me into all of this.
Yeah. I also think of his when they kill his angel investor, Doug Varick, and he calls him, he's like, "Do fallen angel," and and then they kill him, but really it's Slowick who's the fallen angel, which again he readily admits it, and it's like, even after all this pursuit of excellence, it's like he had all these good things, like he was an angel of God, and he sold his soul to try to gain power over everything else, and that's what killed him.
Man, he's like, I'm part of the
I
problem.
do like how, that's the thing with Slowick. Never, he wasn't one of those. I think if it was one of those stories, the eat the rich type of stories, Slowick wouldn't be. So he'd be trying to rationalize why he's doing it versus him basically readily accepting his part, and that his craft, his greatness is why all of them are there that night. If it wasn't his greatness, if he wasn't there, if he wasn't creating the product for them to either pretentiously or mindlessly consume, they wouldn't be there. He recognizes that he's actually part of the problem himself. Now his solution to it is not is not what it should be, but it is an interesting thing. Is more of that burn it all down because we messed this one up. Is more of his approach. But I do like that he didn't ever try to make excuses for himself. He just went, this is what it is, and this is how it's going to be.
I think that's why it's so compelling. It's because he represents somebody who's free. He's breaking from the chains, and everybody feels the chains in the world, and we're all anxious to blame each other for the chains, but also not take ownership for our own. Like Adam and Eve in the garden. What's the first thing they do? Adam blames, or when they're exposed, they hide from each other, put on these fig leaves, pretension, right? And then they blame each other when God shows up. But Slowick, he's like, I'm part of the problem. So we're all in this statement of judgment, the state of judgment together. And I like when the angel investor is going down with the water, and he's like, listen listen, just like, I'm finally free. It's his deal. And when the Coast Guard comes in, oh yeah, the restaurant is under a new ownership, but that's a different matter. Yeah, just kill him.
Dark.
But ultimately, he's like, I read a few reviews of this movie, and especially from artists, from film types who don't have the theological bent to it, they just say, look, he's an exploited artist who despises his consumers and what he himself has become as part of that problem. And he's, at one point he says, I think this is the consider yourself ingredients in a degustation concept. A disgustation concept would be the way we might pronounce it. That's how my Spanish teacher taught me gusto and degusto. Disgusto. It's like this. He even has a very fancy, pretentious way of describing. I'm disgusted with you, and I'm disgusted with me. I have been feeding your egos by you having access to my food, and you have been feeding my ego by me continually progressing in this. And this is all terrible, and what we need to do is have a purifying fire. But too bad there is nothing to be saved through the fire. It's kind of the idea that he's getting at.
Yeah.
Points.
But, and that's kind of one of those interesting things from the biblical standpoint. We want that purifying fire. God says that he will judge everything in fire, and what is pure will last. And so it is kind of an interesting thing, whereas like he's not testing the fire of these people by putting them through tasks to see if they're worthy of life or anything. He's just decided unilaterally that they're done. It's like they're not redeemable, and the only thing for them is fire at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the whole thing is that they're not, again, like you said, he's not giving them a trial to do better, really. It's like all of the movie is them being punished for their exact sins that they committed.
Yeah. And he says it straight out. And our postmodern enlightened society says we're beyond punishment. But a movie like this is captivating because we go, yeah, we all kind of do deserve punishment. And from a Christian perspective, talking about fires, he does it comedically in the form of a s'more, right? But for us, it's okay.
Yeah.
God could bring the fire at any point, but at first he wants to remake our souls into something, say something metal, something lasting through our connection to Christ in order to endure the fire. Otherwise, we would all be burnt up. That's kind of the point. And the movie, he's like, you won't know what the theme is until the end. That big opening speech where he says, like, don't eat, taste. Don't eat, taste. It's people have come to consume, but not to taste. And my life is meaningless. And Chef has just lost the joy of cooking for people's taste and joy. And he knows it. And it's like, Judgment Day is upon us. And that's the main theme I saw. People eating and not tasting. So thank you, Chef, for telling a story that people are not mindless consumers or ought not be mindless consumers. Thank you very, very much.
Yeah, that ending scene is so good too. When I was watching it again the other day with my mom, and I just mentioned, I'm like, this end scene is just, it's so beautiful. Like that overhead shot that they have of the design on the floor. I mean, they just took so much care into showing that, and it's really quite beautiful. And it just made me think of, like, really, I mean, judgment, even though it's a scary thing, you're like going into the fire, but it's also like it's just, and it's part of God's judgment. And so in that way it is kind of beautiful in a sense, because it's justice, and this is kind of what they deserve, even though it's kind of morbid. Their little s'mores hats, I just can't, it cracks me up every time.
Yes.
But disturbing but funny.
it is very much a life under the sun type of thing. There's not overly amount of hope that this movie brings about, but obviously a lot of things to think through.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, and the
Absolutely.
just the concept that we can all be trapped together in this joyless, tasteless exchange, chasing after meaningless things, right? And that's like I'm pretty right wing pro capitalism. I see the free exchange of people's goods and services as a way to bring material happiness in this world, but it's very specific. Material happiness. It's very efficient for bringing material prosperity. But to my
Mhm.
to my more communist leaning friends, it is true that this could be a soul sucking enterprise, and I think they are correct. Right? What happens to Chef Slowick is completely realistic. He grew excellent in his craft, and his skills grew to such a point that his clientele became people that couldn't appreciate the taste of food. So he ends up killing his angel investor, who would substitute ingredients in order to commoditize his work, right? And there are no substitutions at Hawthorne. Right? That it's one of his few moments that seems really insane. He seems so controlled the whole time.
Yeah.
But that was like, in a twisted way, it kind of reminds me of the Ten Commandments. You will have no other gods before Yahweh. No other gods before me. Right? And it's like, they do not pass his test. But you know who does pass God's test, right? To have the proper God? It's Jesus, right? Jesus, when he sees food, right, he says, worship God and serve him only. Don't put the Lord your God to the test. He passes the test of fasting and temptation in the desert. Meanwhile, all these other people didn't. And they've all been wrapped up in the sinfulness of their world and their institutions. It's just this very heavy picture, is that all of us have a tortilla with our name on it. Right? All of us become mindless consumers. And that traps us. That traps us in the world. Which I thought was interesting. So why punish the movie star in the movie? I don't know which one of you said it was pretty comical, the way he talks about why is he dying?
Yeah. He because he wasted a weekend. So I watched the movie and I didn't enjoy it, and that was my day off.
My one day off in
Yeah.
months. Yeah, I think it also could point to, again, like, we all know from him talking to his assistant that he's just kind of selfish and, a name dropper. And he even name dropped the chef. He says he knows the chef, but he actually doesn't.
Yes.
So, and I think he's been doing these, shady movie deals where he stars in crappy movies, because I think he did say that at one point. He says, yeah, it was a crap script. It was, a bad show, but hey, I got paid for it. So he wasn't really pursuing excellence in his craft, which I think Slowick took personally.
I think so. Right? There's no substitutions at Hawthorne's, but the movie star's like, oh, I'll accept some substitutions to my craft. I got paid. But paging Dr. Sunshine, I think. But it's funny because at first,
calling Dr. Sunshine.
Calling Dr. At first, it seems like this is besides maybe the student loans thing, or maybe the Richard's wife, this seems like the least justified reason to punish him. Until the theme of the movie rings around of people who are eating and not tasting, or what the chef says, what happens when an artist loses his purpose? Right? And so what I heard when he said that was a Judgment Day prophecy, or prophetic word, not in the sense of predicting the future so much, but to in the book of Revelation, the letter to the church of Ephesus, right? You'll hear this phrase a lot in church. It's a good thing to remind us of. You've lost your first love, right? So we have Jesus speaking to the church in Ephesus. I hear it echoed in Slowick's word, like Revelation 2, this section, verses 2 through 7. I'll take some verses out of just a few select verses. Verse 2 says this: I know your works, your toil and your patient endurance, and how you cannot bear with those who are evil. So it's like your excellence in all this church stuff. Like you're excellent, Ephesians. They're a good church in terms of doctrine and discipline, but they've lost their first love. He says this in verse 4. But I have this against you, that you have abandoned the love you had at first. Remember, therefore, from where you have fallen. Repent. Do the works you did at first. If not, I will come to you, remove your lampstand from its place, unless you repent. And so we have Margot, because of this experience of the pictures. I think Maddie was pointing this out, of him smiling as a 17-year-old, something like that. She reveals herself as Aaron, right? She lets go of her pretense, and she helps the chef return to his first love for just a moment. And ultimately, her victory is described as eating, both in the movie and in this section to the church in Ephesus. Jesus says this in verse 7, "He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To the one who conquers, I will grant to eat of the tree of life, which is in the paradise of God." And so it's like, to those who return to their first love. Now, for the movie, it's silly, it's kind of silly, like experiencing joy in cooking for other people's joy. But for us, returning to our first love is Jesus, the love of God, the love of your neighbor, seeing his kingdom spread. But in this story, we see who's the one who conquers. It's the prostitute, right? Jesus says the prostitute and tax collectors are entering the kingdom before you. All of the religious, pretentious Pharisees, teachers of the law. She ends up escaping condemnation.
Yeah.
It's great. It's great. And she ends up eating the fruit of love, a delicious, very traditional, very American hamburger. Which what I love about that scene is that I think hamburger is the best food. Well, I guess cheeseburger was specifically, but I think that the cheeseburger is probably the best food that's ever been invented. Like a year or so ago, I fed my son his first cheeseburger ever, and I literally told him this. I was like, I've got good news and bad news. Good news is that this thing's going to be delicious. The bad news is I don't think food gets any better than this. Like, I can't. Probably, I'm kind of ashamed to say this. If you listed out all the prayers I've ever had in my life, especially for Thanksgiving, I bet you thank you for hamburgers and burritos, actually, is on my top if you tabulated all of them out. Because it is just wonderful. We are like the rich people. Most people throughout history were not able to eat a hamburger, but we live in this world. I love hamburgers. I know this has now gotten so silly and just earthly compared to what we were just talking about with the church letter to the Church of the Ephesians. But the one who conquers is the one who really enjoys. Go ahead, Eric.
I was going to say, going back to the cheeseburgers, I agree with you. So my first two jobs that I had, one was I was a funnel cake person doing the funnel cakes at county fairs and stuff like that. That was almost over 20 years ago, and I still, to this day, cannot eat a funnel cake. Just all the oils and stuff like that. Funnel cakes are wonderful. I just can't eat them anymore. But my second job is I was a fry cook at a country store, and I would make burgers and steak and cheese and all the type of stuff. And to this day, I can still eat burgers. I ate a burger every single day for the 2 years that I worked there. So you are right. Burgers are probably one of the greatest foods that God has ever invented. They're quite incredible.
It's so good.
Welcome to Hamburger Theology. Yes.
But I think it was another C.S. Lewis quote about food, about the way in which you can enjoy food in a worshipful way. And there's just this, like, every once in a while I'm biting in particular, it's usually a hamburger. And it's just, how good of a God do we have to allow me to have taste buds and this experience? And like, you can have an experience where you enjoy food in the way that Slowick wants you to. That's also a worshipful experience. Yeah. But you can also worship your food. Mm-hmm. And there is a way to do,
everything can become an idol.
Everything can become an idol, and you can use almost everything in an act of worship. right? In its within its proper place. And I guess it's a pretty good argument for popcorn theology, is that like you can eat a hamburger to the glory of God. You really can. I've done it a few times. And you can watch movies to the glory of God. Or you can become a pretentious, critical, selfish, indulgent, gluttonous taker. Or you can become a pretentious judger of the takers and miss it, like kind of like Margot was at the beginning. Both of those extremes. I love the way you put that, Eric, earlier in the podcast. That'll ring in my ears for a while. But I do have one question that's kind of plagued me at the end of this movie. So she drives away on the boat. She wipes her face with the menu, which is awesome. But that last look that she gives, I do not know what to make of that last look. I don't even know what word to use to describe the emotion that she's conveying. Is it disdain? Is it disgust? Determination? What did you think? Did you have any thoughts on that last look? Did that mess with you too?
It's been, it bugged me so I slightly didn't understand. Like the first time I watched it, I didn't understand, and I saw your question last night. And I watched it again today. I still don't know. I still don't know. It's the look. I couldn't get a good read on her face and what they're trying to convey. Like there was almost like a smugness, but
Yeah.
I couldn't understand where that smugness would be from. And then she takes another bite, of the burger at that point. So I'm not quite sure what we were supposed to get from that. How about you, Maddie?
I think I kind of took it as just, I don't know. I didn't really pick up on smugness. Maybe I need to watch that scene again. I think the last time I watched it, which was last night, I just kind of saw it as acceptance. Like, because her boat ran out of gas or whatever, and she was just kind of sitting there, and then she watched the whole thing.
Did it run
blow
out of
up,
gas?
And I think yes. So
Okay.
it ran out of
That
gas,
makes more sense.
And she was just kind of sitting there, stuck, and then she saw the restaurant go up, and she's just kind of sitting there, and I think that's kind of when she's like, well, guess I'm just going to enjoy this burger then, since I'm sitting here. And that's just kind of how I saw it, at least.
That's how I saw this scene. I was like, if she had smiled, I would have been like, what a poetic way. The boat runs out of gas, which I was pretty sure that's what it was. And she's just enjoying her burger as the island is catching on fire. And it might be kind of this is a life under the sun acceptance story, in the words of Cinemagogue, is I'm on the boat, trapped here, and it doesn't really matter because I'm enjoying this hamburger before I die. Kind of an earthly Ecclesiastes view of no life transcendent. But the last look she gives, it's almost the look that you would put on somebody's face if it turns out that they were behind the menu the whole time. And it doesn't jive with everything that we just described the whole movie. It makes me question my interpretation of the movie, but I have no clues as to why.
Maybe that's what they were going for. I don't know. But
I'm gonna go with Maddie's interpretation. I liked hers better.
I like it. Yeah, it's way better. It's way better, Maddie, and I'm all confused. Or maybe it's something like, Noah comes through the flood.
I don't know, but can you really be happy after everything that you just went through? Because, she just went through a lot. Like, that was very stressful. And, I don't really expect her to be just like, cool, I got a burger. But, at least I got a burger out of it. I think it's more, I don't know, subtle, I guess. I was just thinking it's just a more subtle way of saying, okay, cool, well, I'm just going to enjoy this while I can. Because I think even she knows that eventually this might catch up with her, too.
Yeah. Well, I think so. There was something odd that I noticed. Actually, in Sloat's speech at the beginning of the film, or the beginning of when he starts to describe the menu, he mentions, he said, you'll learn to forgive or find forgiveness or something like that. I forget exactly how it was phrased.
Yeah.
And we see that particularly after the chase, that and you see it particularly with the actor and his assistant, where they start to confess sins to each other. and they don't directly like say like, oh, I forgive you or anything like that, but there becomes like this recognition between them.
Yeah.
And then you also even notice that with the rest of the people, particularly when the s'mores, everything's being poured around. I think one of them, it may have been the assistant, is looking at Slowick, and she says, "Thank you."
No, that's
She's like, "Thank you,
Richard's
thank you."
wife.
It was like they all had this.
That's
No, they all had this kind of weird like acceptance, and I wonder if that's kind of, although she survived, she still also got a little bit of that acceptance that it brought to bear all the sins that you had, and you were judged for it. It's just she, in a way, got grace, and so she's still accepting that. Oh, all these sins, I now have that burden of sin relieved, and now I can just experience this situation I'm in. And now they experienced it to death, and she's now experiencing it to life.
I think that's a good way of looking at it.
It's just a bit odd because it was like it was all the look was almost like it was Agatha all along. Like I hope I didn't spoil something from you guys, but that was during the pandemic. You should have watched everything during the pandemic. But it was that was.
I think I agree with Eric though, because when I was just thinking back to that last scene too now, and Linda, the gal that we're not quite sure what her sin was, except maybe as an enabler, is that when Margot or Aaron, whatever, is leaving, she stops.
Yeah.
She doesn't just leave. She stops and she looks back at everybody, which is really interesting. And she looks like she might actually stay. Like she, honestly, in my opinion, I think she was seriously considering staying. And then Linda looks at her and waves her on and is like, "No, like it's okay. Like you should go. We deserve this." But like you said, Eric, but you've got grace and you should go. And but everyone else, they did not make a move to try to get out too, because they knew that they were guilty. And I think Aaron again also knows that she is guilty, and that again it's just grace that he's letting her go, and even though she knows that she deserves it too,
because they shared just a glimmer of a moment of the first love. It's like this is just a deep soul searching story that just kind of came out of nowhere. But I don't know, popcorn theologians. I like their answers for that last look, but I still don't know what that last look means. I would like to hear maybe some answers in Facebook, Discord, any of those. Hit me up, because as much as I love this movie, I feel like I figured it out.
Fan theories.
Oh, I saw some weird stuff, like maybe he let her go because the meat was actually made from customers that he'd killed before or something like that. I was like, no, you're missing the whole point of the movie. Anyway, but that last look, I just don't.
Sweeney Todd?
I just don't know. But this movie, if there's ever been a movie that its message is so similar to ours, that you are not a mindless consumer, this is it. Do not be a pretentious food critic. Do not be a pretentious critic of the food critics. We want you to taste and see that the Lord is good in all these areas, whether you're eating a hamburger, whether you're watching a movie. Taste and enjoy the God who's so good that we get to not just consume, not just eat these stories, but we get to taste them. And taste and see that the Lord is good.
Yeah, honestly, it ties in perfectly to James's book and his categories of how to, judge things. I don't know. I just thought of that, and I'm like, it does fit that absolutely perfectly. You've got the 5 different categories, and this movie basically, if you're looking at, if you're consuming in judgment, if you're consuming mindlessly, again, like it all just fits so perfectly.
It really does. You guys have any other concluding thoughts before we wrap this one up?
Take it away, host.
Take it away. Well, yeah, Like, with everyone, it's time to, I want you to listen up and focus. You may want to come in to movies and eat them and mindlessly consume them. But don't eat, taste. With all of you, remember that you are not a mindless consumer. I love you all.
We love you, host.